We are alive on 5. Good morning to you, Lydia. It's the 17th of July. And how are you holding up this morning? How are you holding?
Morning. I'm holding on to something. It's called a water bottle. It's cool this morning. Can feel it's a
Oh
bit
no,
cooler.
and you are outside, and yeah, I'm inside, but it's also very cool out here in Gordons Bay. Lydia sits 1,600 kilometers northeast of where I live, so we've got her online because we are talking through a very important subject. How do we assess? It's about assessing and assessment. How do we assess uh, transformation? We use this fractal trajectory for transformation in the service to assessing growth stages. In other words, we're checking out where people are at, and we can check out where we are at in our understanding emotionally, uh, practically, uh, mentally, and in every other way. So, we're going to talk this morning through the issue of why it is important to think well and talk well, speak well, circumspect in thinking and talking. That's number 5, right? So, if we now look at circumspect in thinking and speaking, uh, let's talk a bit about that, Lydia, and look for a way forward. Um, why is it important to think well? What do you
Because
say?
that's part of how we were made and designed. I mean, it's whether you realize you're intentionally thinking or not, you're thinking, you know? It's like I used to tell the kids about choices. Whether you make a choice or you don't, you're still choosing either way. And I think
Right,
thinking's like that.
right.
You're either
Yeah.
thinking well or you're not thinking well, you know? So um, it's part of you.
It's
It's
part of
yeah,
who
it's
you
what makes
are and
us
what
yeah.
you are. Mm. I mean, I can go without water for a couple of days. I can go without food for a couple of days, but I can't go without thinking even for between 3 to 6 seconds. Um, and as Os Guinness says it so aptly, Christians would rather die than think, and they do. And so we kind of have this anti intellectual approach. Oh, no, 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 no. We don't need that. We don't need to think carefully. It's like a student saying to Harry Ironside. Harry Ironside taught at Dallas Seminary, where I attended over 35 years ago. And Harry Ironside said, "Oh no, it's important to prepare. Spend time studying the text, study the script, so that you can speak well and have something to say." And the student said, "Oh, Dr. Ironside, I don't need to study. I don't even. I just open my mouth and it comes out." To which Harry Ironside responded, "Yeah, when you open your mouth, God fills it with the east wind." So, what a way to answer a student. Um, so that's in the area of speaking, but also in the area of thinking. We just think things come naturally, and then we wonder why we talk such a lot of nonsense. I've been watching the Middle East conflict and the ignorance in the West, in particular, Western countries, including our own country, Lydia, where we can't think straight about the Middle East conflict. We are duped into thinking that there's an occupation in Gaza and West Bank, and we don't realize Gaza was a part of Egypt for many, many years, and Egyptians don't want the Gazans. None of the Arab countries want Gaza. None of them. But they pawn them off onto Israel and they make up this narrative, this story that gets punted on the media that these are an oppressed people. This is an oppressed people group. And I would love somebody to interact on, uh, you know, on these platforms with me on that, because we buy a false narrative. We can't think for ourselves. What we hear, we just assume that, oh, that's true. Yeah. So anyway, so I like what you're saying. Yeah, thinking is part of who we are, right? So how do we get to think well? How do you get your students, your learners in the classroom to think well?
Um, it's understanding, yeah, to think well. It's challenging students who are willing to want to think well. I think that's one thing. You need to be, um, yeah, willing. It's like being willing to learn, right? So how do you challenge them to think well? First of all, address the fact that you're not thinking well, or that you can think better. So it's putting out, some kind of hook again. That curiosity comes into play, and saying, okay,
Mm,
how do I train myself to think better, to think well? What's the narrative? What's my story? What stories have I bought into? And all of that now starts to create awareness. All of that starts to say, okay, this is where I'm at. How do I change the trajectory of my thinking? Where should I go? What should I consider? What observations have I made that are true or false? Yeah,
well, let's look at that, Lydia,
exploring,
because
right?
you used a
In that
good word there,
exploration, yeah.
hook. You need to hook them. We're so bad at that. What hooks the child? Because there are many hooks in a 30-second window, but we zip right past it, and because we want to throw something at them that they must think through. And we don't get them hooked onto
Mm,
where they are. We don't hook into where they are. If I think of your younger brother, well, your only brother, the only way I could hook Levi was talk about sports. That was the hook. And I was on the other side of the spectrum, a non sports oak. And here I've got a son that couldn't sit still as long as he was doing some sport except netball. Um, you know, you wouldn't connect.
mm.
But when I locked into his world, I had him, right? I got him good and solid. Uh, and so get to be watchful of where these hooks are that you can hook into their world versus get them to hook into your world. The only way you're going to get people, even adults, to think well is hook into their world first. Get onto their agenda first. But we don't think like that. We want to get them onto our agenda first. So that is very crucial if I think of the woman at the well in John chapter 4. Does Jesus come to her and engage with her and say, man, you're a Samaritan and you're a dog, you're a half breed, you're mixed race, you're the offscourings of the earth, you're pavement special, you need God in your life. He doesn't start there. He starts with a very simple hook, right? Because she sneaks down to the well in the middle of the day. Why? Because everybody else is having their siesta, and she's a woman who's, a woman of questionable character. Goes down to the well, and he gets into a discussion with her about water and about drinking water at a well. That's the hook. And he gets her, once he hooks into her, once he watches for where the hook is, he takes her away. He eventually directs, he moves from her agenda onto the agenda that he actually wanted to talk to her about. Because eventually she comes out, I think you must be Messiah. Must be something very significant. So what does that say then for getting onto people's agenda?
Yeah, it's exactly what we're talking about. Being able to engage with others from where they are at, and in order to do that, you need to assess what's going on,
Mhm.
right? Being able to engage with somebody is seeing, okay, what's that body language saying? Where they're from? Ask. I mean, that question of meeting that woman, he actually was asking a question for himself, wasn't it? We both here. What's going on? Can you
Mhm.
help me?
What are
And I
you
think
doing here?
we,
No, I'm coming here.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm drawing water. Oh,
you
water.
know,
To
yeah,
drink?
yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, and
Mm.
he's onto it in a moment. But that means, again, let's use our big word, Lydia. You need to learn to live with tropophilia, live with high uncertainty, because you don't know where that question or statement is going to be fired from, right? And that's why we live in a day in this 21st century with the technological superhighway and AI and all the rest of it. It's throwing our lives into such a spin. I mean, I don't even need to ask another human being for an answer. I can ask a digital device. I can ask AI a question and I'll get an answer. How's that for you? Talk about tropophilia, right? And so you have to ask now, what does that say for the kinds of discussions we are having? Because you can have a discussion like this with a machine. The machine will talk back to you. And you ask another question, the machine goes and comes back with another option. And you throw a question and it comes back with another option. So that's a discussion for another day. But thinking well is important. And it starts off with getting onto their page first, right? Versus throwing your page to them and say, yeah, catch.
And I just want to kind of interject there, because what's it's reminded me of is a conversation that we had based on what I was recently listening to. Jordan Peterson's doing an interview with Dr. Simon Baron Cohen, and he's the top researcher into autism. And what he really shares with, and I was chatting to, I know we had this conversation, was just really saying there's this idea of cognitive empathy and the idea that people think differently, and that's what autism is in terms of thinking differently and being empathetic when you're trying to look at someone and understand where they're coming from, or trying to gauge where they're at or growth stage, or even for yourself in terms of thinking well. I mean, this brings in a whole nother area of people that think differently. An interesting point to share in terms of empathy, that we all actually think of others' mental states. That's really what it's about. And you can see how these coincide with what we're talking about. He says this is the highway example. I think it was a psychologist or a researcher that says when you go onto the highway, you assume that everybody else's mental state is to stay alive and stay safe. So drive alive, arrive alive, because everybody stays in their lane. Nobody generally is swerving and driving into anybody else's lane. So you're being aware of somebody else's mental state. As a 2-year-old, he says, he has seen, and you can see it with little ones, that are actually empathetic by nature. So they started discussing instinct, and I'm not quite there yet, but it's the whole idea of if mom hurt herself, the child's going to hear something that's different, going to capture their attention, see the consternation in a mother's face, and respond. Either come and say sorry. You know, Isla's done that with me. I've got tennis elbow, and she sees the bandage that I have here, and immediately she goes, "Mommy's arm sore." You know, there's a reaction to what she's seeing, what she's experiencing, what she's perhaps there's an element of definitely learned behavior there. But at 2, you know, what does that say for us as human beings in terms of an empathy scale? I mean, there's so much there. So you know, when you're thinking well, there's so many components to it to consider. I mean, you mentioned the AI. I'm just thinking what they were talking about was some people are systems people. They think in terms of systems, your engineers, right, your mechanics, and some people are I think they said social systems people. You're empathetic, more empathetic to others. So that would be your teachers, your social workers, you know, psychologists want to know about you more so than putting a machine apart and putting that together. So that's part of thinking well, knowing how what your proclivities are, perhaps what you are drawn to. Maybe that's part of the curiosity element. Doesn't mean I can't put something together, and doesn't mean I can't learn how to interact with others. Um, all of that is part of thinking well, and what that means. Where are some of the areas that I need to consider how I think and what I should be thinking about or not thinking about?
Oh,
So it's a
absolutely.
lot.
Absolutely. So to develop skill at dialoguing, being able to talk, because that helps me think through things, right? I'm talking through it, which means I have to think through it. We normally say somebody who talks too much, their mouths engage before their brains do. But the thing is, I'm thinking all the time, but am I thinking well? That's the issue. Or am I thinking in what we call a silo? Or am I thinking, in my words, a well, right? As in water well. I have the ability to think well inside of a well, but I can step out of that well into another well and think inside of that well without getting ideologically locked into that well. And that's a skill to develop.
Mm.
You talk about apartheid, for example. Those of us who lived through part of that, or most of that, there are certain bells and whistles that go off when we hear the word, right? Because we have an affinity to it. We were there, we lived with it. And maybe there are things that we don't see because we are so emotionally captivated inside of it, and it takes somebody outside of it to blow our categories. You know, said, have you ever thought that if you were born into a white skin, what your response would be? Well, I've never thought of that. But how could I? Because I'm born into a brown skin, or a black skin, or a green skin. Right? Um, and I think as teachers, we have a unique responsibility, a great responsibility to teach young minds how to think well. Ask the questions, but that's not the only way. Elicit information in a dialogue kind of way without them even knowing it. Get them to talk. Put out a statement, for example, as we said. You don't always have to ask a question. Some people are very intimidated by the fact that you're asking a question. You ask an average preacher a question, everybody kind of looks at you and says, where do you fall at? How dare you ask the pastor? As if he's been elevated to the right hand of the Father in terms of authority, right? And number one, scriptures talks about those men in the plural. There are a bunch of them. It's a plurality. It's and we think in these strictures, so that when somebody asks a mom a question, she gets all riled up. It's like, how dare you ask me a question? Well, if that's your posture, you're gonna be rearing a kid with a one-track mind,
Mm.
right? Now, some of us are born rebels. Right? If I look at myself, I would say I'm a born rebel. Oh, always countering things, countering the status quo, in the home, in relationships. I remember Dr. Howie Hendricks saying, when you are teaching a group, watch for the hellraiser. Identify the hellraiser in the group. And you probably have on your hands somebody as a youngster that you could shape, who could make a very good leader. But most of us are averse to hellraisers, right? We don't like them because they rile us, man. They ask all the hard questions, the tough questions, and they don't respond in status quo kind of ways, right? Always rocking the boat. So what about talking well, Lydia? How do we get that to happen?
Mm. Yeah, I think I think the joy. If I think it takes me back to when I was teaching in a space using history to seniors. I mean, you could see the kids who are actually thinking reasonably because they could generally speak reasonably well. Um, so those two are really tied together. But there are times when you catch a student or someone. It doesn't mean just because they can't verbalize something doesn't mean that they're not thinking through something quite well. That um, so how do I get you to talk well? Means sometimes we need to be patient with someone to say you don't need to respond immediately. This is not about how fast you can answer. This is about putting your thoughts together. You're there already. You are showing a framework of how I can engage, how I am communicating, what am I communicating. Be mindful of the kinds of words I am saying. So again, I think it's just like thinking. It's that awareness of where am I at and what is that connection between what am I saying as to what am I thinking. I think it would be similar, and even for us as teachers to not jump on it and be like, oh, that student has an issue. No, Are you giving them the opportunity and the space and providing a space for that person to respond back to you in a way that they feel they're able to process and then put it out there, in terms of speaking well. I think sometimes we think speaking well means that motivational speaker on the platform that speaks at a pace and they're using these big words and they articulate. That doesn't necessarily mean you're speaking well. That means you're communicating at a pace using big words, right? I think we
And
need to
maybe
make a distinction about what that means. Yeah.
yeah, missing sense making, because you are far
Yeah.
too fast, you're far too quick, you're not sensitive to your audience. I think that's always our problem, right? We read things, we listen to stuff, and we get very passionate about it, but we're not watching for the cues, where the people are at and how they are responding in relation to us, which is so crucial. So to encourage speaking in the home, I mean, your little one, you must encourage her to talk and question, things as much as possible, and expose it to as wide and as appropriately as possible, a broad range of things. And you'll find that things start to click. But the more we curtail them, it's amazing how we curb their creativity, right? I mean, when she draws, what is this? Can't you draw a better picture? What are you, handicapped? I mean, just think. Lydia, we grew up in a home like that. I mean, it's like, are you crippled, man? What's wrong with you? Did you do a brain damage when you were born? That's the kind of climate. And if you're born into that kind of climate, man, it's amazing the impact it has on you. So you become very self conscious when you speak, because mom or dad will always down your throat. It's like, sit down, shut up, don't move, don't breathe, right? Whereas if you grow up in an outfit where, oh, I like what you're saying, talk to me a little more about that. What's that about? Have your daughter explain the picture that she draws. Man, she'll give you
Story.
answers that are out of space. They're from Mars. It's like, this is daddy. It looks nothing like dad. It's a circle with a big dot in the center. It's like, but see, conceptually, you know, she puts, she makes sense out of that, and to encourage that. And when we
I
are
just want to
around
make a
people,
Yeah,
mhm,
sorry. I just want to make a point as well. I've noticed over the last couple of days, more be more aware of it. So my husband Kyle is more of a he loves the old school music, right? Or old different kinds of genres of old classic music. And one of the songs came up is the Yellow Submarine,
mhm,
and it's got an interesting little vibe to it. And one day, and it's not like we listen to that often. He's talking about talking and exposure, you know. And I said to him, "Oh my word!" One day I would think I was in the shops, and she started going, "Yellow submarine, yellow submarine,"
and
and
you
then
are
I thought,
trying to,
"Okay, she's already capturing. She's been capturing. I shouldn't be shocked by that." And then I started saying, "Okay, let's be intentional also about the kinds of things, like just like talking." And I found a whole bunch of old Christian kids songs, and it's amazing how just playing that now, this is the second time, a different kind of song, and then she starts humming some of the words already, as if now she knows and she's been hearing it for ages. So, I mean, they're such sponges, and that's how they develop and grow. When we're talking about thinking and speaking well, I mean, a comment already by a principal is she can't believe just how much she's exponentially continued to develop in speech. And all of that's part of it, because all of it's working together, you know. It's forming, like now she can say, if you say to her, she wants something, you can say, how do I say it? She knows she must say please. But now the challenge is, please what? Please whom? So everything is now about, how should I structure? What am I saying? What is the goal? Then it's going to be, well, once we get there, tone. I can understand, growing up at home and you and mom really being intentional with us about, how do you say that? It's not just what you're saying, you know, the importance of how that comes across. That's about speaking well. That's about thinking well, because your tone reveals the heart of what you're saying
that's
and how
right, yeah.
somebody receives that. I mean, just look at those in the home as parents, how we are part of forming such key things. before we even come into adulthood. It's actually
That's
it's
right.
huge. It's
And you
huge.
can be ruined wrong long before you get into adulthood because you were
Yeah.
told to sit down and to shut up. And that's all that's burnt into your mind. So that when you hear somebody who speaks often, or as we say, talks a lot, get very irritated with those types very quickly. But could it be that that person was prevented from really venting? Or could it be that that kid, when they were younger, they were encouraged to talk and to ask questions and to do it respectfully? I remember when we got to the States and we lived with an American family, you would remember Bill and Hope and Grant very well. Um, he was so vocal about things, and you think, now, where in the world does a child come up with those kinds of things? In our homes, we'd probably have gotten slapped, you know. But he would ask the hard question, and they would just very quietly say this and such and this and such. And to learn that early, because thinking well and speaking well has to do with learning to talk well, right? And if I can talk and articulate clearly, then I can learn the art of speaking well. And how does that connect and make sense when I interact with other people? So we're talking about huge subjects here, and we by no means are being exhaustive. But I would love to us to just keep it at a level where you've got a little one and you're interacting with her, and there's something very significant that you are right inside of, teaching her without even being strategically intentional about it, teaching her to think well and to speak well. And the more strategically intentional you are with it, the better it is for you and for her. You're doing a great favor, a great service. So let's keep up the good work, even when you get tired. We've been going almost for half an hour, so we're
Sure.
gonna draw to a close here. What would be your concluding thought if you were to pass on one thing to a young mom about thinking and speaking? What would you say to them?
I think if you are aware of your own, of how you think and speak, provide the space for the young ones. I just have here, sure, training is in the home. Training is reinforced and started and continues. Everything else in terms of your community and learning spaces, and that supports, that can support. But sure, there is so much importance that you as a mom have, and not to allow that to be diminished because of outside voices. You have an important role, and the most important role to play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not to relinquish that role. You know, we can call in supports to help us in that role, but not to relinquish it, because I think too many kids come up in the world without that family context, and that's how they can't relate in the real world, or they relate as one-winged bees. We were kids, used to catch the bee and rip off one of the wings, and of course, when you do that, the poor bee just buzzes in a circle, and that's why our kids buzz in a circle, because they don't know what that context is like and what a loving atmosphere does for thinking well and speaking well. So, Liz, thank you very much for your time, as you are a busy mom, busy with homemaking and child rearing. Even though you got one who feels like 10 children, that's fine. Enjoy it, because before you know it, it's gone and it's over and the bird will fly. And you'll kind of sit and say, what happened? But you're doing a great job. Keep going, Liz, and we'll chat some more in the next episode when we get together. Thanks for your time, Lydia.
Pleasure.
We are alive on 5.